I've spent the past 4 months crying, screaming, and giggling at books. So let's rate the 32 books I've read so far this year, from Big Slay to I literally want a refund. Let's go! The first book I read in 2024 was The Runaway Groomsman by Megan Quinn, and I just wish I had the physical copy of this book so that I could tear it to shreds and use it in my cat's litter box. Say that I did not enjoy this book is an understatement. I absolutely hated this book and all of its characters. Writing was so incredibly shallow. I did not enjoy the female protagonist. I thought she was kind of just very pick-me and not in a good way. In this book we follow Fallon and Sawyer is a very famous screenwriter, and he goes to his ex's wedding and he's the groomsman, and then he runs away from the wedding, aka Runaway Groomsman, and he goes to Canoodle Cove Cabins in California, and it's a family business and Fallon is currently the owner, and everything goes from there. I rated it 2 stars on Goodreads because I didn't enjoy it, but I also know I hated it. I want a refund. Next, I continued the Throne of Glass series, which if you know that I love the Throne of Glass series, and I can't really say too much about it because I just don't want to spoiler it for you all. Yeah, without saying too much about it, I think I'm gonna put that one at thoroughly enjoyed because I loved it, but it was one of the lesser amazing books for me in the series. So there she goes. Then Heir of Fire. That one is a big slay, as well as Queen of Shadows. I actually think that both Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms are my most favorite books from the series. So big slay. Yeah, but in between Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms, I read Our Wives Under the Sea. This was a very short book. I actually have it over here, hold on. This is her. She's very skinny. She can definitely fit into a Brandy Melville top. And in this book we follow Leah, and Leah goes on this deep sea mission where she goes to the bottom of the ocean and she's there with a couple of other people. And when she comes back, there's just a lot of weird shit going on, and you mainly follow her wife's perspective. Is that a spoiler? It's very H2O coded, but not really. It's like H2O except more confusing and morbid. It was fine, it was not great, but it's kind of memorable, and I think about it more often than I'd like to admit. But that was just because it was so out of pocket that I can't help but think about it, because I'm like, yeah, what the fuck even was that? I think I'm gonna put it at just fine. Now, like I said, Empire of Storms, she's a big slay. She really is a big slay. Oh my god. I think about the Throne of Glass series so often. I just can't wait to do a reread, and I can't wait for my friends to start reading it so I can yap to them about it. Okay, then Tower of Dawn. I hate Cale. What the fuck's his name? I hate Cale. I hate his name, and I don't give a fuck about Nesrin, but because I did the tandem read, if you didn't know, with Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, they take place at the same time, but they both follow different characters. So you can do a tandem read. Instead of 2 separate books that take place at the same time, you have one big story. I did that, and I loved doing that. If you're gonna read the series, definitely do the tandem read, because it's a lot better, especially if you hate Cale and his guts. Because me, I would burn that motherfucker to the ground if I could. Listen, Cale Westfall is literally the Matt Donovan of the Throne of Glass universe. I know I'm right. So if I had to read a 700 or maybe even 800 page book about Cale, I think I would lose my mind. So because I did the tandem read, I did enjoy the book a lot more, because I was kind of looking forward to it being over so that I could read about the other characters in Empire of Storms again. But overall, it wasn't a bad book. I just did not give a fuck. Period. I think I'm gonna put it at just fine, because it was fine, but I just don't care. I could not give less of a fuck. Moving on. Kingdom of Ash. Duh. If you've read this book, then you know that there's no other spot for this book. It is a big slay. You can't tell me otherwise. Next, I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This book was fine. I like the paranormal aspect of this book, and you find out a lot about these characters and their past and how the female protagonist is able to do what she does. Overall, it was cute. It was heartwarming. In this book, we follow Florence Day. She's a ghostwriter for a very famous author, and when she asks for an extension on her book deadline, her editor Benji refuses. And then a couple of days later, Benji shows up on Florence's doorstep as a ghost. And then You get it. I think I would place this book in the just fine category. Then I read the book Send Nudes by Seba Sams. I bought this because I thought the cover was funny. Like, literally the title is Send Nudes. I was like, ah, I'm buying it. And then I started reading it and I was like, I'm 100 pages in and I still don't know what the book's about. And I finished this book and I still don't know what the point was. So ideally, if I was able to go back in time, knowing what I know now, I would not have bought it. So I'm gonna put this book in the I want a refund category. 20 across. I hate that book. Oh my god. Next, I read Hooked from the Never After series, aka the fucking aka the fairy tale retelling stories for freaks. But hear me out, because I know that everyone who's like really into dark romance loves this book. I did not know it was dark romance going into it. I read Never by Jessa Hastings, which is a Peter Pan retelling. And because I love Jessa Hastings and I will read anything she writes, I read that and I was like, oh, you know what? This is pretty good. Looking back, I probably only liked it because Jessa Hastings wrote it, because I don't give a fuck about Peter Pan. I don't care. So I saw this TikTok, and that's the first fatal mistake. I listened to TikTok. This TikTok said, if you liked Hooked, you should read Never by Jessa Hastings. And I was like, ooh, well, I liked Never by Jessa Hastings, so I'm gonna read Hooked. Fatal mistake. People died from that mistake. I think my inner child died from that mistake, because tell me why this was the worst book that I've ever read. And I have read some crappy ass fan fictions. Okay, so basically this is a Peter Pan retelling where Peter Pan is a drug dealer going by the name The Pan, which that's the only thing I remember being good about this book, because I thought that was really fucking funny for no reason. We follow Wendy and she goes to a bar called the Jolly Roger, and the owner of the bar is James Hook, Captain Hook. And then he kidnaps her, rapes her, just to get back at her father, Peter Pan. No, no, that is not for me. I want a refund. Next, I read Elvis and Me by Priscilla Presley. I don't really want to rank this book because it's an autobiography and I don't want to rank someone's life. I don't be like, oh, I think your life is a waste of time. Like, you're not doing that. So for that reason, I'm not gonna rate it right now. But I did, however, like, enjoy this book, and it was written incredibly well, and Priscilla Presley did an amazing job. Then I read One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. In this book, we follow two very powerful witch families in Manhattan. We follow the rivalry between the two families, as well as the youngest sister and brother from the two different families kind of connecting with each other. I enjoyed this book, however, I did not love it as much as I thought I was gonna love it, which kind of left me disappointed at the end. But this book just felt very dragged out at times, so I think we're gonna put it in the just fine category. Next, I read Icebreaker, which is a hockey romance where we follow a figure skater, Anastasia, and a hockey player, Nathan. Because of a misunderstanding, they have to practice in the same ice skating rink, and they can't stand each other, but then 200 pages in, they fuck each other. So it's basically every other romance book you've ever read. I hate him. Ugh, I hate him so much. Oh my god, wait, I don't hate him, I love him. Mwah, 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 mwah. Small setback. Mwah, 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 mwah. Pregnancy trope in the epilogue. So just fine is a great way to describe it. Next, I read Wildfire. This is the second book in the Maple Hill series. It's set in the same world and you follow some of the Icebreaker characters. And when I say some, I mean you get a sliver from them. And this book is set at a children's camp. That was the first mistake. This book we follow Russ and Aurora and they have a one-night stand, and then in summer they end up going to the same summer camp to like volunteer and help with the children and stuff, and then they fall in love at this camp with the children, and then they do non-PG shit at the children's camp, even though it's forbidden because it's a children's camp. Huh? Who allowed this to be published? It was also just like the characters and the vibe and the plots and the storyline of the book were the exact same as Icebreaker, except this was set at a camp. No, not for me. I want a refund. Then I read The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins. In this book we follow Ruby McTavish. She's a very rich lady, and after she dies she leaves all her money to her adopted son, and he finds all of these letters about her different husbands because Ruby has had a lot of different husbands and they've all mysteriously died. So there's basically just a lot of rich people drama, which is my favorite genre of books. So I loved it, and this book was a big slay. Next I read The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. In this book we follow a group of teenagers who all have these abilities, and they all work together to solve closed cases for the FBI. I thought it was so interesting, and I liked learning about the characters and their abilities. The writing was fast-paced, and we're just immediately sucked into the story. And because of that, I did thoroughly enjoy this book, so I'm gonna put it into the thoroughly enjoyed category. Next, I read Part of Your World. I enjoyed this book, and I would recommend it. However, again, not that memorable. I definitely fell in love with Abby Jimenez, her writing style, but the tropes, when I read the back of the book, I was like, why do I own this? Because I am not interested into these tropes at all. It was like an older woman and a younger man, and she was really rich and he was broke, and I was like, that's the literal opposite of what I want. However, I'm glad I picked it up because I did enjoy it a lot. Then I read Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. You've heard me talk about this book like 20 times already, so I'm not going to say too much, but this is the third book in like BJ's and Magnolia's point of view, and I can't say too much because again, I'm gonna spoil the fuck out of it. However, I will say I will never shit on Jessa Hastings because she is my mother. I'm so sorry. Jessa Hastings, please don't file a restraining order. I loved this book. However, I will say that the first half of this book was not as magical as most of Jessa Hastings' her book are. It kind of just felt like she needed some time to really get back into like story and the characters and the writing style that she usually delivers. But that aside, the second half of the book makes up for any doubts I had about Jessa Hastings. You should win a Nobel Prize for that book. And I love the Magnolia Parks and Daisy Hate series so much, so this is a big slay. This is a like, not a 6, not a 7, not an 8. This is a 17.5-star read. Next, I read Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. I read this book when I was not really in a mood for a romance book. I had a shoot that day, and when I got in the train at like 6:30 a.m., I looked on my Kindle, and the only book that I had downloaded on there was this book, and I was like, no, I have to read it because I don't have anything else. And because going in, I already resented the book, I kind of made it worse in my head than it actually was. I also hate books like this that are like marketed as enemies to lovers, except he said one rude thing to her when she was like 12, and now they still hold a grudge over it. That's not enemies. When you read enemies to lovers in a fantasy book, he has murdered her father and she has killed his little brother, okay? That's enemies. I didn't like it, but I also didn't hate it with every fiber of my being like I hated Hooked. So I'm gonna put it at the a waste of time category. Next, I read The Worst Wingman by Abby Jimenez. This book is part of like this very big collection of short stories centered around Valentine's Day. It's very short, it's 61 pages, yet it had me crying at the end. How do you do that? With 61 pages, how do you make me cry? So I'm gonna put it in the thoroughly enjoyed category. Next, I read The Exception to the Rule by Christina Lauren. Again, this is one of the Valentine's Day stories collection. I love this story so much. Follow this like string of emails, and you start off with the man. I'm gonna name him fucking Bob. So Bob sends an email to Amy. He's not supposed to send it to Amy. And Amy's like, well, you know, wrong person, but this is the only email I've got so far on Valentine's Day, so thank you for that at least. And then Bob kind of makes it this annual thing to send Amy an email on Valentine's Day. Actually, if this was me, I would have asked after like the first email, what are you? Like, where is this going? But it's such a cute and original story. I have never heard of a story like that. And I do think about this quite often for no reason. I'm gonna also put it in the thoroughly enjoyed category. Next, I read The Breakup Tour. And hear me out. When I picked up this book, I did not know that it was Taylor Swift fanfiction. Fatal mistake. Trying to see past the fact that it's Taylor Swift fanfiction, which is really hard to do, but I'm gonna try. This book sucked ass. It just felt like I was genuinely reading fanfiction that was published on Wattpad and not an actual book that was published to be sold in actual bookstores. In this book we follow Riley Wynn, and she wrote an album That's like her breakup album. So every song is about a different guy she dated. The song that gets the most attention from the entire album is about Max, who she dated in college. And it's like the only guy she ever really loved. So then when she goes on tour, she invites Max along to play the piano, and you find out a lot of stuff about their history, and you find out if their spark reignites. I am glad that I read this book because I was laughing so much whilst reading it because it was just so bad. I'm not trying to be a hater, okay? This is just my opinion. So because I did have a good laugh whilst reading it, I'm not gonna put it in the I want a refund category. It's going in the waste of time one. Then I read A Love Song for Ricky Wilde. I've already talked about this book on my channel, so I'm gonna try to keep it short. But I genuinely did love this book. It was such a amazing story, and I loved the writing style of the author. The author is the same author as 7 Days in June. So if you read that book, you're gonna love this. And if you haven't read that book, I don't care, you're gonna love this. So I'm gonna put this in the thoroughly enjoyed category. Next, I read Killer Instinct, which is the second book in the Natural series. As much as I enjoyed the first book, in my opinion, the characters were just not interesting enough to have a second, third, or even fourth book. So I DNF'd it at 67%, I think. So I'm gonna put it in the waste of time pile. Next, I read Kingdom of the Wicked by Carlijne. I'm trying to gather my thoughts on this book, but it's very like all over. I enjoyed this book. However, I had very high expectations for this book, and it just did not meet them. But it is kind of my own fault because no one told me it was gonna be good. I just saw it and I was like, that shit's gonna be great. And then it wasn't. And that's my own fault. In this book, we follow Emilia and Vittoria, and they are two witches who live in Italy amongst just normal people. Emily, her sister Vittoria, gets killed, and she summons a demon from hell to ask him like, okay, what the fuck happened? But she ends up summoning a prince of hell. Despite my high expectations, I think I'm gonna put it in the just fine category. Next, I read The Deal by Elle Kennedy. In this book, we follow Graham and Hannah. And Graham is a hockey player, and when he fails a test, he asks Hannah if she could tutor him, and then you get the point. I love this book. It was such a corny, cute 2015 Tumblr coded little romance, and I ate every single word of it up. So it's going in the thoroughly enjoyed category. Next, I read Darling by India Knight. In this book, we follow Linda, and she's from this very secluded family, but they are very wealthy, and you follow them, especially Linda, making some very fatal mistakes. It was such a fun read, and the ending had me like, the ending was out of pocket. Looking at my rankings so far, I feel like it's gonna fit in very well in the just fine category. Next, I read The Wake Up Call by Beth O'Leary. You follow two receptionists, Izzy and Lucas, and in order to make some money, they go through the Lost and Found to sell some stuff, and then Izzy finds a lot of engagement rings. So she comes up with the ring thing, where she finds the owners of the engagement rings, and then hopefully in return they get like a reward for it. I just didn't care. Lucas and Izzy were just not really communicating at all throughout this book, and the ring thing was also forgotten like halfway through the book. Pisses me off. I'm gonna put this book in the waste of time. Next, I read The Daughter of a Pirate King, and I was one page into this book, and the main character, the female Alosa, she was wearing her hair in a messy bun, she was small, she hated men, and she could take down 3 men without a fight. And I was like, yeah, this is the type of fancy book I've been looking for. And when she got kidnapped, she asked like, hey, but can you also bring my wardrobe? Are you kidding me? But then you find out it's not a kidnapping. She's actually there for a reason. It's a planned mission for her father. Her father is the pirate king of like all of the seas and blah blah blah. I loved this book because it was so corny and it had all of the basic fancy tropes in it. And guess what? I was in the mood for it and it fucking delivered. Then I read Will Day or One Day. I read this book in a day, which is insane. But in this book we follow Shane and Lila. Every time I read like Shane, I couldn't help but thinking of Shane Dawson. Like it's so engraved into my brain. And they play the main characters in this cheesy paranormal romance show. Right about season 5, Lila leaves the show, and then in season 9 for the grand finale she comes back. They were very toxic, especially Lila. They had a lot of chemistry as well, so it was very hard for me to distinguish whether they were gonna be like old people holding hands or divorced within 3 months. I loved the Hollywood aspect of this book because I just love that. I think I'm gonna put it in the just fine category. Then I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I was so excited to read this book because I've heard so many good things about it. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint. This book genuinely had my jaw on the floor, I think like 47 times. I thought that I knew where the story was going, and then bam! Another plot twist. Rita McFadden just kept on pulling those plot twists out of her ass. It was insane. I'm gonna put this book into the big slay category. So those are all the books I've read so far in 2024, ranked from big slay to I want a refund. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe. If you want to follow me on any other of my socials, they are linked in my bio. Again, thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope you enjoyed it because I know I did. Bye guys.